Okay, so some 44 people have joined. So let's start with today's session. Welcome to day 2 of guiding postgraduate research students. So we'll begin with a recap of what we did yesterday and then we will go along. Okay, so in day 1, what we did was we looked at what is a PhD, what is expected of a PhD guide, the PhD continuum itself, what is your position on the continuum. We talked about the guide student alignment and we talked about your goals for a PhD student. Today what we want to do is to move on to day 2 where we look into some details of the guiding process. Okay, we look at some examples, some common concerns, and we will also have a live interaction at the end of the day followed by a home assignment. So moving on, we will continue to use Mentimeter for interaction. So you can scan this code and go to the first activity for today. It's the same as yesterday's code. So the question here is, what were some key learnings and takeaways for you from day 1? Okay, you need not restrict your response to the content. Your takeaway could also be about the pedagogy, the design of the activities or the technology. Okay, so let's see some key learnings and then we will move on. Okay, if you need to see the code, it's right there on the top of the page, 87435685. Okay, now there are some responses. Okay, so a lot of people are saying student expectations, guiding process, PhD continuum. Luckily that seems to be a very key learning for many people. Definition of PhD, realistic goals, my continuum position on the continuum, metacognitive alignment, okay, synergy of both parties, identifying your style. Okay, we have kind of stabilized at 60 responses from 30 people. So it's good to note that most people are saying continuum, and that's emerging as one of the main criteria, and alignment as the second important criteria, along with expectation on the side and flexibility and words like that. So that's very good to note. So moving on with today's activity. Before getting into new topics, let's take one more look back. Okay, so 90 people attended day 1 out of 120 registrations and 60 people have submitted their assignment as of now. So this is a pretty good ratio. Also 100 slides have been created in the class responses deck. So there are 32 responses to what's your definition of a PhD. There are 20 responses to where would you like to be on the continuum as a guide. There are 20 responses to what would you look for in a PhD student, and 23 responses to what are your goals for your PhD student. So let's look at some responses now. I'll just paste the class responses link once again in the chat. Okay, so this is in case you would like to see them yourself. What I have done is I have categorized the responses. So some of you may find that your slides have been moved around, but I have not deleted anybody's responses. So let's look at some responses from yesterday. So for what is a PhD, a response from Jack caught my attention. It says that it's a journey of research, guide and student together explore. So the together explore is something that I was attracted by. And there was also a second point of learning. There is a notion of guides learning, how to tackle and manage different types of students in terms of aptitudes, level of knowledge, etc. And the student learning, of course, is an important point. There is another interesting response from S3, who talks about acquiring expertise vertical and depth, horizontal and breadth, but also talks about transfer and applying the process to pursue other problems, and also talks about becoming a professional practitioner of the expertise acquired. So these are some interesting responses. These are not all the interesting responses. I just picked a couple of them which caught my attention in the early stage. So if we look at what is expected of a PhD guide, that was again something that we did as a Mentimeter activity. So there are 11 responses which talk about goal oriented direction. There are responses which talk about research oriented feedback, mentorship, knowledgeable guidance, motivation, providing motivation to students, and there are some responses which talk about patience, understanding, and resource support. So these are again very useful things to keep in mind, because as we go along, this is what you have to provide to your students. Now moving to some responses on where would you like to be on the continuum as a guide. So since I had looked at Jack and S3, I kind of followed them. So Jack says mostly fixed but having a little flexibility and a deeper approach. So once again, the pros and cons are very well identified. So mostly fixed but a little flexible can lead to directed work and can help complete the PhD as per specific timeline. It can also develop the expertise of the student as well as faculty and bring them recognition in the area. The cons is it may not work with all students, it can put more pressure on the students, and it may need more time in deepening the research. So these are very useful points to note. And if we look at S3's point, again it is like very similar, that I would like to be on the slightly less flexible side, where students have to be limited by the core expertise but foster students' individual interest. So again, the pros and cons are well identified in terms of ability to establish an identity for my cohort in a specific set of expertise, possible strong network, while the cons being difficult to unlearn and expand through different lenses, and getting typecast and repetitive. There is also one anonymous person whom I would like to thank for writing a really detailed response on this question. So again, this is on the level of a slightly predefined research agenda with flexibility. And once again, the pros and cons have been very well stated. So they may guide the student better, they may have in-depth and useful discussions, there may be better alignment in research, while the cons may be that it might limit the student's creativity and a student may feel chained from this approach. So thank you to all these people who have taken the trouble to share their responses. Now if you look at what would you look for in a PhD student. So from Jack we have previously done work and its quality, interests, research aptitude and ability to question. From S3 we have again passion for research, critical thinking, analytical thinking, effective communication. From Anonymous there is a nicely created list which are students who are motivated intrinsically towards research, has shown some level of persistence, which is an important thing, has done some background research on what research I or my group does, this is again a very important thing, has participated in some extensions and has some related expertise. And one more anonymous person has said that having good domain knowledge, flexible to change their area of interest as per the guide's instructions. So this is also a valid point to say, as long as you say it upfront to a student and it is not surprising to the student, you can say that this is my position, I am not going to be very flexible, you have to change. So the student can choose whether to work with you or not, ready to learn new techniques, highly motivated and so on. And finally, when we look at what are your goals for your PhD student, from anonymous we see that I hope my students achieve the following, like publishing a paper, giving in-depth feedback on others' papers in the same area, ask a relevant and decent question in an academic talk, regardless of its topic and area, teach an introductory course in linguistics or cognitive science, collaborate with colleagues, that's an important one. And another anonymous says it is able to think as a researcher, able to analyze the papers, is able to write papers, and is able to defend her or his work. So this argumentation skill is again a very important thing. Okay. So now why have we looked at these responses? In order to stress the importance of peer learning. So if I were to only make these slides and talk about the various positions on the continua, I am not going to be able to capture all such responses. So there are many good points in the class responses slide. I have just picked the first few responses that caught attention. So my request to you is to add your own answers if you have not already done so, and do go through the responses of the others. You may find additional points for your own position. You may find thought-provoking positions different from your own. Both of these will be very useful for you to improve your learning, not just from listening to me, but also by listening to or reading about what others in this cohort are saying. Okay. So the key recommendation that I make at this stage is to copy ideas that you like into the notes section of your own slide, so that it's all there in one place for you for later reflection. Okay, so we can take a 1-minute break here and then we will resume.